Welcome to Section 420, Talkin Yankees. Well, if you love your old baseball cards and if you love baseball stats, then you're going to love Mark and Andy. They're from the Baseball Beyond Batting Average podcast, so let's get right into it. Thanks for coming on to the show.
Hey, glad to be here.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Now, where are you guys based out of?
So we both live in North Carolina. We are both in the Triangle. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Yeah, I live in Durham, North Carolina.
Cool. So I think you might be my first North Carolinian guests.
Cool.
Now,
Proud to represent.
Obviously. And now you have your podcast, Baseball Beyond Batting Average podcast. When did you start it? What was the motivation behind it? I mean, is there a story to that?
Yeah. I can start, and Mark, you can fill in, as tends to be how we go with the podcast. I guess it was about 2 years ago. I approached Mark with the idea because we always talked about baseball stats and advanced baseball stats, and we would text. And at that time, I had created a Twitter persona in which I tweet out backs of baseball cards, and Mark didn't know it was me. So we've been friends since high school, but I was sleuthing it. I was undercover, and I said, "Hey, you want to do a podcast, about baseball stats?" And he was like, "Yeah, but nobody will listen." And I said, "I think I might have a way to get people to listen." I said, I have several hundred Twitter followers who might be interested. And he's like, "Oh, are you baseball card backs?" I was like, "Yep, that's me. That's me." So Mark, fill in the rest.
Yeah. So we started, but it goes back further than that. We met in high school, and we met over random baseball players. We used to play a game one summer where one of us would say a baseball player, say, for example, Alex Rodriguez, and the next person had to say a player whose first name started with R. And then we would do this forever, and we would name the most random baseball players, and we would get so excited about it. And we knew that nobody else in the world would be as excited about the random baseball players we come up with except for each other. And so that kind of stuck, and we have a good time on the podcast. We talk about stats, but we just like talking about baseball.
Yeah, that was pre-internet, obviously.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you guys are baseball card junkies. I mean, do you like collecting like valuable cards, or just kind of go to like a flea market and just get like a bunch of like Don Russes from like '88?
That's definitely what Andy does. I don't care about super valuable cards. I like baseball, and I like for my collection to represent my love of baseball. Andy just likes to keep all the 88 Donners that you mentioned.
Now, were you ever tempted, like I did it once, like you get an old baseball pack of cards and like the gum is there, and you just you want to see what would happen, and you put it in your mouth. Now it disintegrates. That's what happens, unfortunately. But did you ever try that?
Oh yeah.
Not for a long time. I was out of the game for many, many years. After I got into high school, I kind of phased it out. But then in the last few years, partially with Mark's influence, I've gotten back into it, and I've gotten some old packs. But yeah, I've since then I have not attempted the old gum. A quick story about 88 Donruss. You joke about that. I do not still collect 88 Donruss, but if you go to Mark's house, he'll give you a box of 88 Donruss just for coming over, because he just has a box of them.
I will.
And in terms of the aesthetics of the look of baseball cards, let's just keep it within the 80s. And do you have a favorite? Obviously, each of them had a look. Like Fleer had a look, Topps had a look. And then towards obviously the end of the 80s, you have the infamous Ken Griffey Jr. Upper Deck card. I mean, do you have a preference, either of you?
As a kid, I was a Donruss guy. The first set I ever collected was an 85 Donruss set. I remember getting rack packs from the drugstore, looking for those last cards. My last card I got was Razor Shines. He was the last card I needed to collect the set, Expos Razor Shines. So I really like 85 Donruss, 86, 87, even 88. Those are the prime time collection. I like those dark borders.
Yeah, I collected everything. I was always more of a Topps collector. I think A, because they were more plentiful, easier to find, and B, I just drank the Kool-Aid of them being the real one. So I always thought, well, this is like the official set. As an adult, I appreciate the scorecards. That's right, the real one. I appreciate the scorecards for the wealth of information on the backs of them.
Now, obviously, one of your recent podcasts, number 59. Again, you can check out Mark and Andy on the Baseball Beyond Batting Average podcast. Obviously, very interesting breakdown, which you'll probably catch the eye of a lot of Yankee fans, was the Kirby Puckett, Don Mattingly stats breakdown. And again, if you look at both their stats, eerily similar, but of course, as you know, Puckett's in the Hall of Fame, Mattingly isn't. Now, I'm not one of these Yankee fans that is blind and say, yes, Mattingly should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't think so, because again, he doesn't have the longevity and stuff, but obviously Puckett is. But he only has certain stats are that a little better than Mattingly, in terms of it's like 200 more hits, a couple more Silver Slugger awards. But overall, I mean, really pound for pound for the same, but obviously one's in the was World Series champion twice, probably helped, but obviously one's a Hall of Fame and one isn't. I mean, what were your feelings on the two players?
Yeah, so I studied Mattingly. Andy studied Puckett for this. And so Mattingly was crazy great, but for such a small amount of time. I mean, he was better than Puckett. I mean, there's a 5-year period was Don Mattingly was arguably the best player in baseball. But then as soon as that 5 years was up and his back broke down, he was done. And so you want to talk about Puckett a little bit?
Well, yeah, I was going to talk in general about Mark's theory was that it was Puckett's postseason heroics or success, really, that put him over the top. If you really look at it, Puckett was only really on 2 good teams. As much as he has this reputation for postseason success and he won 2 world championships, those were the 2 times they made the playoffs. And we know the playoffs are a crapshoot. So it's interesting to think that would be what differentiates him from Mattingly. The other theory, and the thing that I was thinking, is they both they played almost the exact same years. Their stats are almost the same. The difference was the way they ended. Mattingly was a back injury. Puckett was an eye ailment. And it's a much more tragic story for Puckett. It's almost like it's not his fault, whereas, Mattingly's was more of a baseball injury. So I think Puckett got a little more sympathy in that respect.
Yeah, and I think Puckett overall, sorry, Mark, Mattingly was an okay guy, but he really wasn't much of a personality. He's just kind of like a business guy. Puckett was just more smiling, more cheerful, and I think that played into it a little bit.
Yeah, Andy even thinks Puckett's body type may have helped him. Cuddly, round little guy.
Yeah, I would love to give him a hug. But also I just think the one thing I think what killed Mattingly was, as you pointed out in the podcast, was that 1990 season. Obviously, that's when the back injury started to kick in. I think he only had like 5 home runs and like a 250 average, so I brought his average down. So if he could at least had one more good season with power, because when he came back, he always had the batting average. He just lost the power. He couldn't drive the ball anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Mets fan, but Don Mattingly was my favorite Yankee for years and years.
Yeah, not much to hate about him. Again, because he's not loud, boisterous. He just kind of shows up and hits.
Yeah.
Now, in addition, you guys are stats junkies, like to break down stats and so forth.
Yeah, so we started the podcast with the introduction to advanced stats. Our first episode was on base percentage, which is not a very huge stat, but it was kind of the building block for the Moneyball era and the way we look at stats in a different way. So our first 20 episodes or so are going through individual stats, talking about what they are, how they're calculated, why we might care about them. And we look at a lot of leaderboards to decide if we think this stat is something that actually is beneficial and actually tells you something about the player. And the big reason we started this podcast, 1, was to have fun, but 2, we believe in statistics. We believe that they tell us something about the player, and they obviously do, because every single Major League Baseball team has an analytics department now. But there's a whole lot of guys, both in baseball and out, that do not like advanced stats. Just the mention of the stat war will turn people off in a second, because they are old school and they think about baseball being about guts and how getting dirty and
clutch.
Clutch. And so we like to think that our podcast is a pretty safe way to enter into the world of advanced stats, where we're not trying to beat you over the head with it. We're just talking about them.
Yeah, we're coming from the perspective of people who are learning about the stats. We're not experts, we're both math teachers, so we have that analytical, mind in a way. But we kind of got into this wanting to know ourselves, like, how do they calculate WAR, and how do they calculate WRC plus, and is this something that we can get behind? And so we put it out there for other people to learn with us and give the pros and cons, and say, here's what we think is good about the way it's calculated. Here's what we think doesn't make sense about it. I think more times than not, we do like the stat and we believe in it. But there have been times when we've had an episode about a stat where we've said, I'm not really a big fan of this one. And eventually we ran out of stats. At least, well, there are always more stats, but we ran out of the big ones that you'd want to do an episode about. And so we started doing other things like the Mattingly Puckett episode and a whole bunch of other ones like that.
So I heard some rumors you might have a list regarding Yankees in terms of stats of maybe all-time overrated or current underrated, overrated Yankees.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to talk about hitters, Mark?
Yeah. So I don't want to make you mad here, but let's start with guys who are underrated. I don't know what you'll think about this one, but I think Alex Rodriguez as a Yankee is underrated. First off, he's the greatest third baseman in Yankee history, which is crazy to say. He's 8th in WAR and from Baseball Reference in Yankee history. He's 6th in all-time Yankee home runs with like 350 some. He was on 7 all-star teams with just the Yankees, 14 overall, but 7 with the Yankees. And give you a couple of advanced stats. His OPS plus is 136, average is 100, and his WOBA is 395. WOBA is one of my favorite. It's one of our favorite advanced stats. It's weighted on base average, and what it does is it takes it values the hits, like it gives more credit for doubles, more credit for triples, more credit for home runs, instead of something like on base percentage that only gives the same value for every type of hits. WOBA tries to give you a better sense about how valuable the hitting actually was, and a 395 lifetime WOBA is pretty impressive. And so I don't know that I think people sort of, at least I get the sense the Yankee fans are not huge Alex Rodriguez fans, but he was really, really good for the Yankees, and he helped them a lot.
No, I totally agree. I thought he was underappreciated. I think, what happened with him, obviously, it was the whole comparisons with Jeter and all that drama. And look, I'll say Alex off the field, his personality, I think it's gotten much better now that he's the, ESPN commentator. Now he's like on like Facebook all the time, posting like he's cool now. He's with J-Lo. But while he's a player, yes, I think he was underappreciated by Yankee fans. And I don't know why they would boo him. So it's like, why are you booing this guy? He's like, again, I actually did an episode about a season or two ago. I actually did a breakdown of each player by position. And I say, yes, same thing. A-Rod is definitely the greatest Yankee third baseman of all time, even though people say he's not a real Yankee. There's my quotes for you.
A couple other guys who are underrated, I think. Willie Randolph has the 9th most WAR in Yankee history. He has a 373 on base percentage. His WOBA is 335. Solid defensive player. Him and Cano both rank better than Joe Gordon. Joe Gordon is a Yankee who's in the Hall of Fame. Willie Randolph is not in the Hall of Fame. Cano probably won't be because of the PEDs, but Cano's a top 10. Cano's a top 10 second baseman of all time. Brett Gardner, 19th on the position WAR list for the Yankees. Part of that is because he's played a lot, but solid player for a ton of years. Two guys that are not known as Yankees, but they have underrated careers. Bobby Abreu is 20th all time for right fielders in a stat called JAWS, which looks at WAR, career WAR, and seven-year peak WAR and combines that. So he's the 20th greatest right fielder in all time. That's ahead of Vladimir Guerrero and 10 other Hall of Famers. Jason Giambi, again, did a lot of damage with the A's. He's the 25th best rated first baseman according to JAWS. That's ahead of Tony Perez, and Don Mattingly, just for reference sake, is 39th on that all-time list. So there's some underrated Yankee batters for you.
No, and that's yeah, and those are actually all my players I loved. Cano, I mean, I liked him, but he bolted for the money. I don't blame him. But I loved Bobby Abreu at the time because to me, it was like the perfect Yankee in terms of taking walks, having a good eye at the plate, a professional hitter. And same thing with Giambi. Again, people always talk about the home runs and stuff. But again, he had a great eye at the plate. Again, would take his walks. Same Gardner, pain in the neck at the plate. They work the count. So, obviously that seems to be the recipe for success.
Yeah, and it's why Judge is the best Yankee right now. Even last year, LeMahieu was the WAR leader, but Judge only played 102 games, and he had a 5.4 baseball reference WAR. He's obviously the leader of that team. People give him a hard time for his strikeouts, but the value of his walks and his hitting discipline is really tough to beat.
Yeah, if I had to pinpoint one thing that advanced stats has highlighted, it would be the ability to walk. That's really the differentiator in some of these underrated, overrated hitters. It's like these guys who were overrated in the past, a lot of it was because they didn't walk, and now we know how valuable walking is. Well, do you want me to talk about some underrated pitchers?
Yeah, do it.
For the Yankees? So it's kind of like what Mark said. Some of these guys aren't known as Yankees per se, but they did play a good chunk of their time, or at least a few seasons. And number one is a guy who just got into Hall of Fame within the last couple of years, but Mike Mussina, for a time there, was underrated despite having close to 300 wins. In that Jaws stat that Mark was talking about, he's the 29th best starting pitcher of all time. You got to take into consideration that he played in an offensive era when teams were scoring a lot of runs. So his ERAs may not look as good as guys from the 80s, but very good. David Cone. So David Cone on that same list is 64th among starting pitchers in Jaws, and there are 65 starting pitchers in the Hall of Fame. He had one of the best Yankee starting pitching seasons in 1997 when he had a 6.7 baseball reference WAR, which is close to MVP level. Andy Pettitte. Now, he's one who got a little taint with the PEDs there towards the end. And who knows, without that, he might be headed to the Hall of Fame and probably should be. In 1997, that same year with Cone, he had an 8.4 WAR. Now, that was the year after he was the runner-up in the Cy Young. So just to give you like an advanced stats perspective, in 1996, when he was the runner-up to Cy Young, he had 21 wins and a 3.87 ERA. I think Pat Hinkin won it. Yep. And in 1997, the very next year, he only had 18 wins. But his ERA was a full run lower, 2.88. And this is in 1997 when guys were going to the plate with syringes in their butt, So like to have a 2.88 ERA in the American League in 1997 is, phenomenal. So I think Pettitte's a little underrated. My next guy, Ron Guidry, I think was super properly rated in his time, but people have forgotten about him. And just wanted to point out his 1978 season, which, I mean, he won the Cy Young Award. It was not like people didn't notice it, but he had it was the best starting pitching season in Yankees history. And he led the league in FIP, WHIP, ERA, and ERA plus, which are like all the big rate stats. So it was good by advanced stat measures as well. And I think he went 25-3.
Yeah, the 25 wins definitely probably overshadowed that for the voters.
Yeah. And I say the same thing with Guidry. I think he does get overshadowed because when people think Yankees, they always think like Whitey Ford, think Mariano. But in terms of, let's say, pound for pound, a starter had one game in Yankee history I got to pull out of my back pocket, I would choose Ron Guidry to start that game. And in terms of Mike Mussina, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. I literally did like 2 or 3 episodes begging to get him into the Hall of Fame. And yeah, again, he only had 270 wins. He didn't have the magic 300, but obviously he always pitched in the AL East. He was always pitching against, basically the best lineups in baseball during his era. Yeah, he never won 20 games until his final season, but you look at all his years, he had a bunch of years where he had like 18 wins, 19 wins. So he was right there on the cusp of having like 5 or 6 20-win seasons. And again, a consistent pitcher. Again, one of the best pitchers of the 80s and 2000s. And I was happy he finally got in the Hall of Fame. I thought he deserved it. Could have wore a Yankee hat. If he wore the Baltimore hat, I would have forgave him. I thought he was a good Yankee. I just felt bad that in 2001, when he was part of the team, couldn't get that World Series. I know they went back in 2003, but that Yankee team was all beat up, and the Marlins, kind of took them by surprise. But I just felt bad he never got that World Series ring. And as for Pettit, I think he's on the cusp a little bit. I mean, he also has a great postseason resume, but I just think, again, with the PED use, and plus he lost the season, for injury. I know it was when he left the Yankees, so kind of lost some time. And I don't think he'll get into the Hall of Fame, but definitely, one of the best Yankee pitchers, and overall is one of the best pitchers during his time.
Yeah. So I'm just going to bring up one overrated. I don't want to make anybody mad up there in New York. So I got one overrated guy for you. My one overrated player is Bobby Richardson. Mm-hmm. So Bobby Richardson, he was an 8-time All-Star. He was second in the MVP race one year. He had 2 top 10 finishes, and I probably got MVP votes in 7 different seasons. But Baseball Reference WAR gives him a career total of 8.1. Mm. If you, compare that to the MVP seasons or the seasons that Andy just talked about. That was one season that was Guidry's best season. That was Messina's best season. In 78. 8.1 WAR. So just his slash line, 266, 299, 335. 299 on base percentage is not going to cut it. 77 OPS plus, again, 100 is average. His WOBA was 284. And so you could claim, he wasn't a great hitter, but he was a defensive wizard. And the stats don't bear that out. He was okay. He was a fairly average defensive player. He provided nothing at the plate. He was on some good teams. He got a World Series MVP. But his career is not great. And he played a lot of seasons and got a lot of accolades for being a Yankee. And the advanced stats just don't say that he was a great Yankee. What do you think?
Well, the only person to piss off is my father, because growing up, it was my father. He liked Bobby Richardson because his name was Richard, and my uncle liked Johnny Blanchard because his name was John. So they all gravitated to those players. So you might have to answer to my dad. So I'm going to pass that message along.
Please do.
Matt, Mark played that one pretty safe by picking somebody from the 60s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, you're going to have to fight like a 70-year-old man,
Well, I'll follow a similar attack for the pitchers, I guess. I found one who was an obvious choice, and this is not one that's going to, shock anybody, but Catfish Hunter is overrated, played with other teams as well. But, he does not have a Hall of Fame resume by any means. He's 169th in JAWS among starting pitchers. And like I said before, there are 65 in the Hall of Fame. He did have a really good 1975 season in which he had the third best by Baseball Reference WAR for a Yankee starter. And he had 328 innings pitched and 30 complete games that season. But his overall resume doesn't warrant the Hall of Fame. His nickname does, and that's why he's in.
My two arguments for him in the Hall of Fame have nothing to do with statistics. It's one, he's from North Carolina.
Right.
That's where we're from. And number two, Bob Dylan wrote a song about him called Catfish. So, but his stats say he's not a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I think what helped this is credential. Obviously, he was with the A's for a while, so I think maybe the championships and being on, he's probably very, again, kind of almost like a similar, like what we say with Kirby Puckett. Like I think being in the World Series and winning some, and it kind of boosts you up a little bit in terms of breaking down stats, whether it's a decade or a period, like stats wise. Who's like the best player of like the 80s or the 90s? Do you ever be able to calculate that?
Well, I didn't break it down by decades, but I have a few that I can pull out just that are all-time Yankee stats that I found fascinating. That I think it would be worth talking about. Here's one. I'm gonna try to stump you guys. Which Yankee pitcher has the lowest career walks per 9 ratio? I'll be shocked if either of you gets this. Now, there's a minimum innings pitched, of course. I'm not sure what it is, but
now, you have to get help. Is it like somewhat within the past 20 years?
Fairly recent, yeah.
Okay, lowest amount of walks. Let's see.
Walks per 9, yeah.
Now, is this a starter or a bullpen person?
I'll give you that it's a starter, usually a starter, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say David Wells.
Wow, that is unbelievable that you got that. It is David Wells. Nice. 1.469 walks per 9.
Yeah, because I always remember he always had great control. He was never, he wasn't like blow you away pitcher, but he always had great control, and he would battle you. But yeah, he didn't give up too many walks. I just remember that for some weird reaan.
Well
you
done.
have my utmost respect.
Yeah.
All right, how about right out of my backside? No.
Yeah. Well, what about highest career strikeouts per 9? This one is even more recent.
Now, again, bullpen or starter?
A starter.
Most strikeouts per 9. Let's see, who's this? I'm going to go with Tanaka.
It's Severino. 10 strikeouts per 9. That's the greatest, in Yankee history. But, pitchers strike out more guys nowadays than they used to.
Is he going to come back healthy when we start playing baseball again?
Well, he went down with the Tommy John, so this season's washed anyway. So, we're not going to see him till 2021 probably. So he's in, but they signed him to early, before last season, they signed him to a 4-year, very friendly deal for $40 million for 4 years, which again, for his value, it's only $10 million per year for that type of pitcher. But obviously now this is the second year they lost with it. So still has 2 more years left in that deal. But yeah, they're not going to see him until 2021. And I guess, and in terms of also other teams like Syndergaard for the Mets, obviously he's going to sit this year out. Chris Sale. So I think a lot of pitchers are just getting the Tommy John. So I don't know, it's that they got hurt or maybe they've been having lingering issues and whatever. The front office is, hey, look, this season's a wash. Go get the Tommy John. Just get it done and then come back strong next year. So again, it could be a conspiracy theory. Who knows? Or just everyone's getting hurt at the same time.
Yeah, I'm thinking about
Tommy
getting
John
it myself.
Tommy John was my 5th underrated pitcher if we would have gone a little longer on that.
And another Yankee. All right, so thanks for coming on again, Mark and Andy. Check them out on Baseball Beyond Batting Average podcast and available on Apple Podcasts. Follow them on Twitter. Very smart guys. Love your artwork with the baseball cards. Sorry we couldn't get into that. Maybe in a future episode we will. But I am a big fan of that Ricky Henderson rookie. I actually got 2 of them, so big fan of that 79 rookie card.
Cool, thanks.
Now, before we leave, you got to eat that gum.
We have to do it before we leave, or we have to agree to do it? Oh, he's going to do it.
I'm doing it. Here we go.
I'm not responsible if you keel over. You don't have to, but if you want to do it.
I'm doing it just for you.
This is good TV.
Oh, crap.
You hear that?
Oh, I can feel the stomach ache now.
Oh, yeah. This is good stuff. All for you, buddy.
It has a lot of vitamin D, so it's actually good for you.